Welcome back everybody. Now in this episode we're actually resealing our Skylight onto our Jayco journey. So I thought it would help anyone out there that has one of these Dometic Heki Mini Skylights or roof hatches. There's not a huge amount of information floating around in Australia. A lot of it's focused over in Europe with camper vans and stuff like that. So I thought this would be a really helpful video because I've done a little bit of research to firstly find out how these assemble and come apart. And I thought I'd collate that into a video for you. So if you've got one of these Dometic roof hatches fitted to your Caravan, Pop-Top or camper trailer, this should be a video for you because we go through everything, including all the components, how to successfully pull it apart, remove it off the roof of your camper trailer, Caravan or Pop-Top, and then most importantly, a lot of tips and tricks to seal this back into place so you don't have any water leaks down the track. It's a critical thing to make sure you don't have water leaks. So in this episode, come along as we show you how. So as you can see, I'm already halfway through this process and the plan wasn't actually to make a video on this, but I figured our channel is all about helping people out and I'm sure a few people will actually be really interested in how you actually remove the roof hatch firstly, all the components that go into it, so we're going to show all that, and then how it all goes back together. So the roof hatch is made up of all these different parts which easily come apart. So in the first instance, that actually makes it incredibly easy to take bits and pieces off to clean and maintain the roof hatch. Now I never actually thought that. I would have thought that in particular the lens that sits on the top would have been fixed in place, but it's simply got a few pins you pull out. You can easily pull this off and give it a clean. The same thing with the cover that goes onto the ceiling, it easily clips off. So if you are even looking to do some maintenance or cleaning of your roof hatch or your Skylight, whatever you want to call it, it is incredibly easy just to quickly pull it apart, clean it all up and then put it all back together, even if you just leave the main assembly sealed into the roof. You're not obviously going to be pulling this out unless you really need to. In our case, we've got a leak, so it had to come off. So if you do notice anything on your roof leaking, you need to get onto that ASAP. And that's where I went, well, let's make a video on it because this will, hopefully make it a lot easier for anyone thinking, oh, well, how do I pull all this apart? And they leave it, and then it becomes a pretty bad thing. So once I actually pulled this flange down from inside, which I'll show you how this all comes apart, that actually confirmed what I suspected, which was that it is actually the roof hatch leaking and not the adjoining solar panel. You can see on the front driver's side, there's a lot of water staining where this sits up onto the ceiling, and that's in the vicinity of where we've got our ceiling damage that I've done a temporary repair on. So I thought I'd show you all these components before we go and strip it all down, because if you're like me, it's good to visualize how it all goes together to get an understanding of the order and process for pulling it all apart. So even if you just need to partly disassemble, say to clean the Skylight, this cover underneath with the fly screen in it, this should help you out a lot. So the first component is obviously this cover that you see from the underside of the ceiling. And that has a fly screen material in it and also the accordion cover that comes out to block out all the lights so you can have a bit of a sleep in the morning. Now, this simply just clips out of place, which we'll show you once we're inside the van. And now I'm actually going to skip forward a little bit because this will make a lot more sense once we get into the rest of the components. The next major component is actually the frame that it gets sealed onto the roof of your Caravan or Pop-Top, something like that. So this frame is essentially like this, and you'll note that this flange that actually seals onto your roof doesn't have any holes in it. So it's not actually mechanically fixed into place. You simply have a bit of sealant that runs all the way around, and then this is compressed onto your roof. But I think what actually helps secure it into place is the next component. So once you pull this main cover off, you will see this component that will be fixed to the underside of your ceiling. Now this will have a number of screws in around the outside that actually fixes onto the bottom of the main frame I showed you just before. And I think what they actually do is compress it down and seal it onto the roof. And this is what I'm going to do anyhow. While that is still wet and setting, you put this up from the underside, screw it all into place, and that will actually help clamp it down and get that sealing force you need around the roof hatch itself. But to remove this is incredibly easy. You just have 12 white Phillips head screws, you unscrew them, and then this pulls out of place. You'll also note the gas compliance sticker here, just noting that you need to have it open for ventilation. It is pretty much on this surround, but it does stick partly onto the main frame itself. Try not to get your fingers all over it so that the adhesive stays there, and you can just stick it back into place once you reassemble this. And now you don't need to remove this if you're just looking to service and clean, say, the acrylic dome, and you want to remove that. This stays into place, because what you can do is actually undo 4 little clips, and that whole clear acrylic assembly comes off really, really easily. Well, you've got these fingers here. These lock over the hinges that form part of the main frame. And then these longer pins, they go in from either side. And it's going to be a little bit tricky to show you, but you can see I've got this pin started. You simply just push it through and it locks in just like so. And then to remove the pin, I just simply get the needle nose plier. I push it onto the side of the pin where you've pushed it through, and then you can just lever it out with your needle nose pliers. So you're essentially just gripping the pin with the end of the pliers, just like this. And then you can slide it out of the hinge itself. And then to push it back in, it's the same. I just push it back through. You just got to line the holes up a little bit. And that essentially affixes this acrylic hatch onto the main frame of the hatch itself. It's incredibly easy to do. And then the other component is obviously the hatch rod. You'll notice these little nubs that come out of the side. So when we remove it, we simply just tilt it to the side, it pulls out, and then to put it back in, it just locks into place like so. Now up the top, it simply locks into the top of the hatch. Using these smaller pins, you simply slide them through and that holds it all together. And with the smaller pins, you can simply just get your thumb on the outside and push that through without any dramas at all. So it's incredibly easy to pull this apart without any tools really, other than these needle nose pliers. And that allows you to pull this whole thing apart, give it all a really good clean, and then it's good to go. So let's head out to the journey and I'll show you how to disassemble it in situ, including the bottom sections that come in from the underside of the ceiling. Then we can remove the hatch and seal it all back into place. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to show you everything in here, which is why I laid it all out inside the shed. So you can understand what each of these components are and sort of get a handle for how they come apart, because you won't be able to see everything up here because it'll be blown out by all the light coming in. But the actual cover or shroud itself, it's very easy. It simply just pulls down. So you just pull it, unclip it gently, and it comes down, and you'll see on the back of it, there's these little metal clips, and they go into the channels on the bottom of the surround that bolts into the underside of the ceiling. So if you just want to clean out, say, the fly screen, if you get all these bugs underneath it, you can simply unclick that, pull it down, and then pop it back into place when you're finished. What we'll do now is we'll just undo this assembly here. So as I said, inside there's 12 screws essentially that hold this surround in, and this surround clamps onto the upper piece that we're about to pull off, so we can seal it all back in. So you simply get a Phillips head screwdriver and you undo each of these 12 screws to allow this to drop down and to be pulled out of the ceiling space itself. Do that another half a dozen times and I'll come back to show you how it just slides out. You just need to undo this gas sticker on the inside and then it just slides out like so, and we now have access up into the actual proper hatch that is fastened to the top side of the roof of the Pop-Top. So that's that big frame that everything connects onto. This is just a flange piece that goes in from underneath and screws to the actual main frame that we've got in here. Now, one thing I'll note with the clear shell that sits on top is that it won't fit back through this hole. So once you pull it off, either sit it to the side on the roof, or if you can, actually locate it somewhere where you can reach it, in my case from the drawbar, and pull it down, get it out of the way, and that way you can give it a really good clean as well. Now, another thing I'll note is I actually did all of this with the roof down. That made it a lot easier to reach up, obviously, and working off the ladder made me a lot higher. But for the sake of actually recording this, it's a lot easier if I've got the roof popped up. So there's a few little tips and tricks there for you, but we'll get you up here, we'll pull all this apart, and then you should have a fairly good idea of how to disassemble the whole vent assembly and do whatever you need to do, if it's just cleaning or actually pulling the whole lot out to reseal it onto the roof. So I'm not sure if you can see a little bit better now that we're up on the roof, but here you'll actually see this plastic bar that runs through that adjusts your hatch into various positions. Located in these little clear tabs here are the pins that go in and hold that. So all you do is you just push them out, put the pins in your pocket so you don't lose them, And now you can see this bar is disconnected from the clear vent itself. You can just twist it now and it will slide out and you can put it down out of the way. And now you're not going to be able to see this, so I'm probably not going to actually pull it apart and put it all back together. But the two pins are located just down in here and you pull them out to the side with the pliers like what I showed you before. Mine are halfway in, so I actually click them back in now, and this will be part of putting it all back together. So what you would normally do is actually pull this off to the side, and as I said, put it somewhere where you can actually locate it from the outside of the van so it's not sitting on top. Just in case it gets windy, you don't want this blowing off. And then when it comes time to put it back on, you'll then have to place it on the roof, drag it back across, and then slot it over to put these pins back in. And now we're on to the removal of this hatch frame itself. Now I can just squeeze through the hatch itself, and that worked incredibly well. If you've got some broader shoulders and you don't actually fit through, you're going to have to reach in from either side. I wouldn't recommend you actually walk around on the top surface of your caravan unless it's rated that you can actually do that. The other option is you actually set up a board that runs from side to side. That might be enough to crawl on, but I'd be really hesitant to do that. How I actually sealed this up when I first saw the leak down in this corner was that I actually reached over from side to side, which is highly possible, but it makes it extremely tricky to get enough force in to cut this sealant out so you can actually remove the hatch itself. Just note that it is primarily just sealed onto the surface. There's no fixing screws or anything like that going through the roof structure itself. Now that is a good thing because that saves another leakage point, but it just means there's a lot of sealant in there to cut through. So what I've actually used, given that I've already removed this already, is just one of these knives with snap blades on them. So it's got a 18mm snap blade, I'm pretty sure. This is what I use for pretty much anything these days. And you just need to be really, really careful with it because I tend to fully extend it out if I can. And you just want to keep cutting through that sealant to release as much of it as you can before you start bringing in the big guns. Now, I believe you can actually use a multi-tool with a little blade on it to actually chop in underneath. Similar to how you would cut through polyurethane with windows on the side of a car or something like that. But I tend to just use just a scraper with a sharp blade on it. So this is a new scraper I bought just to tidy up the ceiling inside. And what you can do is actually force this through to release some of the more in-depth silicone or sealant that's around the inside of the flange here. And I also had a rubber mallet that I was sort of just tapping it in just to help get underneath and release it. Now, once you get all the way around, and it's a little bit tricky, I'm actually sitting down another step on the ladder just so I can be in view. I'd normally be a little bit higher. You can reach around, cut all around, and then you'll start feeling it release off the roof. Now, at that point, it's just a simple case. If I just move a few of these things out of the way, at that point, it's just a simple case of getting underneath and really gently just starting to lever this whole flange up and work your way around. Once you release a corner and down a side, you'll be able to work your way along this front section, which has double the amount of sealant on it because it's double the depth. Go down the side and then it should really just lift off. And that depends on the sealant that the companies use to actually seal this down onto your particular roof. So just let me get out of here. Now we can actually lift this up out of place, and normally you'd have some sealant there. And then if you sit it on its long end like this, you can actually turn it on its side and pull it back through the roof just like so. And so with the hatch removed, you'll have some silicone residue over the top surface of the roof where the hatch was previously sealed on. Now what I do is I just get a sharp blade in one of these Kincrome tools. I'll link it in the description below, and you simply just go around and scrape that off so that you've got a nice clean surface to work with. Now before we go and actually treat this with some isopropyl, I've been using this on the roof hatch, I've got some 240 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to go around and take the shine out of this surface. And that will provide some bite for the new sealant to actually seal onto this surface rather than just relying on it actually adhesing onto the gloss finish that is naturally part of the fiberglass panel that's used on most of these roofs. You don't want to scratch it up too much, just enough to get rid of that shine off it. You could also use some Scotch-Brite if you wanted to, but go around and give all the perimeter surface where the flange will bond back on a little bit of a sand to rough it up. And we'll do the same with the frame, but we'll do that inside the shed. And I'll show you how we go about prepping the underside of the frame, cleaning it all up, and putting new silicone on, ready to seal it back onto the roof. It's dead easy. You just need to take a few of these additional little steps just to get it ready and to make sure that bond is as good as you can possibly get.
A few moments later.
Next, you just want to dust it off, but it's really important to get all the silicone residue off the mating surfaces that you possibly can. Noting that most sealants won't bond onto silicone. You need to make sure you get rid of all of that. And then you just want to give it a spray with some isopropyl cleaning alcohol just to get rid of any contaminants off the surface. You could also use Prepsol or wax and grease remover, but I prefer to use isopropyl, and that's what I've done with all my projects and when I'm at work also. So now let's go and prep the hatch, and then we can glue it all back together. Now to prep the underside of this hatch, it's pretty much exactly the same. You want to get your blade, run around and get any remnants of sealant off that you possibly can. And then you want to give the whole thing a really good clean. Now it's important to dry this out properly because most adhesives won't stick to any moisture at all. So you need to make sure this is 100% dry. I've actually left this to dry overnight because I got too late in the afternoon, which is why I'm making this video, because I've got a few extra hours to actually document this process. So give this a really good clean, and then the most important part, and I'll show you why. So this is the silicone that actually came off the surrounds of this hatch itself. And it pretty much just peeled off. So while it was bonded on there, it wasn't bonded on there very well. That made the cleanup extremely easy because it simply just peeled off. And the reason for that is because all the surfaces that this was glued onto were shiny. So they were the factory finished surfaces that these products come in. So the glossy plastic and also the gloss of the gel coat of the fiberglass roof that this was bonded onto. Noting that when you're bonding plastic onto fiberglass or anything like that, you need to make sure that the bond is really, really good. And remember, we haven't got any mechanical fixings here. We're just relying on the sealant and that bond to hold and seal this hatch into place. So I found that really, really interesting. The whole lot came off in one piece, whereas normally you spend a lot of time getting all the residual silicone off the mating surfaces that it goes onto. When I do showers for work, most of the time is removing the silicone, scraping it all off and prepping the surface, as opposed to putting the new silicone in. Now I'm just going to reiterate that cutting through the sealant, particularly on this front portion here, where it's got a really big depth on it. So this is the underside of the flange, this is the front of the Caravan. You have a double depth bit here, which is what you need because there's a lot of force on the front nose of this roof hatch to cover and bond that down onto the roof. That is a big area to try to cut through. You just have to be patient and cut through it as much as you possibly can. Because if this is still bonded down and you try to lever it up, you're actually going to start cracking the plastic and breaking the flange. And in which case you'll have to order a new Skylight. So you just need to be really, really patient. Just keep going backwards and forwards. Keep working it because every single pass you make with a knife or sharp blade will get you that little bit further in. So be patient. Just remember that you don't want to break this when you're pulling it off, because if you do crack it, that is another point for moisture ingress. So I'm going to sort of focus on that as part of the video because it's all about reducing the moisture ingress and making sure this is fully bonded and sealed onto the roof of the Caravan. So now before we actually spray this with isopropyl alcohol, you do want to sand it down. Now you have two options because all you want to do is just buff up and sort of scratch up the surface a little bit. You can use a Scotch-Brite pad to run over it, just to dull up the surface and get rid of that gloss finish. I actually opted to use some 240 grit sandpaper. I was using 400 to start off with, and I found the 240 just a little bit better because it just bit in and just really dulled up that surface so that we've got the best chance of this being stuck down as we possibly can. So you want to run around the whole outside with your sandpaper, your Scotch-Brite or whatever you choose to use. Just make sure you dull it all down all nice and consistently. And then we can do the final prep by spraying and rubbing down with some isopropyl cleaning alcohol. And as I said when we were up on the roof, this just removes any other contaminants from the surface and makes sure, again, that your sealant is going to bond on really, really well. So now we'll go into the sealant, and this is where it gets a little bit controversial, but I'm going to follow what I'm pretty sure Jayco has done. as opposed to what Dometic actually state in a lot of their manuals. And there's a reason for it, but I'll just run through what I'm going to do, the how and why, then we'll get this bonded back in. Now, if you read Dometic's manual, they say to actually use a non-skinning butyl mastic sealant. Now, that is incredibly hard to find over here. Sicar does have a 710 and Bostik does have one, but you need to order them in, and particularly with the Sicar product, there's like a couple of months wait to get that shipped over. So it's not all that popular. Now, what Jayco have done with ours, and what has been recommended to me by a number of people, is to actually silicone this in. And that doesn't seem too unusual. Now, what you could do above and beyond this is to actually use a polyurethane, like another Sicar product such as 221 or something like that. Now, the problem there is that I've also heard that it does crack and dry out down the track, which is why Dometic say to use a non-skinning. So it's a sealant that doesn't really set. There does seem to be some problems with that as well. So to me, it's an old sealant that doesn't necessarily work all that well, particularly in the climate over here. Might be okay over in Europe, but we find a lot of the sealants over here do break down, including the polyurethane, so they crack and they let water ingress through. So what I'm going to use is a Bostik V60. Now, I could have probably used the V4, but the V60 is known to be a really good structural adhesive. And the important thing there is it's a structural adhesive. So I'm going to use this, and I suspect this is what Jayco have used to actually put the hatch on in the first case. But the important thing is to get a continuous bead all the way around. You don't want to stop and start if you can avoid it, because you can possibly introduce a small little air pocket in there when you squeeze it all back down. The chances are very, very low, but in our case, there was actually a real small bead of silicone just on one side. You could actually see there was hardly any sealant in this little section here, and that is what eventually let the water in. Whether or not it did it from day one, but it definitely did it, I would say, in the 6 months before we bought it. Hence it was getting flood tested when it was up at Jayco's dealership up in Darwin. I'm not having a go at Jayco at all. I do find the warranty process a little bit frustrating when you're a second owner, but I understand where it comes from. It's just a little bit annoying, and I really wish I got the owner to fix this, because it creates an incredible amount of work and damage if you leave it for a long period of time. To the point where even when we bought it, it should have been, that ceiling panel should have been replaced because it was already soft and you could poke your finger through it. If you don't look up there, it's not too bad, but eventually we found that, particularly through a few heat cycles where you get through the summer years, that white lining just flakes off and it just looks terrible. So anyway, I'm not going to harp on that any longer. We're fixing it now, and hopefully once we get this back and installed, we won't have any dramas with this particular roof hatch at all. Now you can use a manual silicone gun like this. You just need to stay on it so you're not stopping and starting too much. So I've actually got my trusty Ryobi caulking gun, and you can see it's done a lot of hard work here. It doesn't use much power. You can adjust the speed up and down, which is what I'll have to play with here, because I'm usually putting a fairly small bead of silicone in. Here we actually want to put a lot in, and that's where how we cut this nozzle down will be quite interesting. We're going to cut it a fair way back because we need a large volume of silicone to fill into the recess that is in the flange here. So if you can see here, there's a bit of a rebate that runs all the way around the perimeter. This is what you actually want to fill with silicone, and you want to have a fairly decent bead in there. So when you compress it down and you want to move it from side to side and actually squash it down into place, that will actually squash down and probably spill out through the sides. I've got no issues with that. We'll just finish it off. I'd much rather have too much silicone in there than not enough in this particular instance. But the idea is it compresses down and it squashes that out. Now, the one big thing that I think, and it's not all that clear in the instructions, which is another reason why I'm making this video, is that bottom flange that comes up from the ceiling, it fixes into the underside of here with the screws that go into all of these holes around the outside. I'm going to put that on before the sealant sets to make sure that this is pulling it down onto the roof and it's not going to lift and deform and pull out of shape when it's in place on the roof. So that's essentially clamping the flanges down onto the roof structure of our particular Jayco journey, and I think that will work really well. If you don't put that in, there is a slight chance that this will just pull itself back up while it's setting, and that will undo the bond that you're trying to make. Now, Bostik do give some specifications in regards to the V60 with their technical documentation, and they say it will take up to 7 days to cure. And given we've got a lot of sealant in here, I'm going to say that's around about it. Now we're traveling in about 5 days, so I'm going to be pushing it as far as the wind load onto there, but I think that's where that flange is really, really critical. But this will be pretty much cured before we leave. If you were going to do a trip, I would highly recommend you do this outside of wet weather. We've got some wet weather coming, which is why this is a rush. And leave at least 2 weeks for this to fully cure, set and bond before you do any traveling, because as you're going down the road, you've obviously got air pressures which are forcing this thing around. And now we'll go and put the sealant in. This is a scary bit because we don't want to get it wrong, but I think we'll be right. I've just been playing around with the speed of this a little bit, but I'm just going to run the bead around and cross our fingers and hope it's all okay. Now I'm going to do it down here because I think it'll be a little bit easier and it's easier for me to film. You could do it on the roof of your caravan. That will make it a lot quicker to simply get it down into place. You need to make sure this doesn't skin over before you fix it into place. So we're going to do this really, really quickly. Given it's fairly warm today, I don't want this skinning off, but neutral cure takes a fair while to skin off anyhow. Let's go and get it done. Trying to do this in one pass. I probably should have had a round table to do it on. I don't know how the windscreen guys do it. It's a little bit stressful. Oh, we've got way too much up here, but that's all right. And again, you wouldn't normally go over the top of yourself like this, but as I said, I'm trying not to have any more than one joint. Rightio, so that's a layer on. I'm actually going to put another layer along this front flange. And again, if it comes out, that's all well and good. I'll just make sure I clean that up. We're definitely going to have some overflow here. I'd much rather have it come out because it's not that hard to get back off. I actually think we have a little bit too much on, but that's it in place. Doesn't look all that tidy, but I'd rather have a little bit more than not enough, given that I don't think enough was put on in the first place. So anyway, I'll get you in place back on the roof again. We'll get this installed and the job is pretty much done. Carefully lift it up into place. And now what I'm going to do is actually flip it over, get it into position before I try to make my way back out of the opening. Then we can squash it down into place, clean it all up, and then we should be pretty good. So you just want to flip it around the right way and really try hard not to get silicone all over yourself. And then carefully get it into position. And now we can start sort of just jiggling it around and getting it into place. And I'm kind of wanting to see the silicone coming out because that at least gives me the peace of mind that it's all the way around the perimeter. So that wasn't too hard at all, and I haven't made too much of a mess. Now what I'm going to do is actually screw that flange in from the underside, then I'll come up and tidy all this up just to get rid of all the residual that's come out from here. Because when we clamp down that flange, I think it'll settle it down and a little bit more might ooze out while we're actually butting those two surfaces together. So that wasn't too hard. I'll just quickly change shirts because I can see myself making a mess up here. Now you could just leave this oozing out if you wanted to, but I think it's nicer just to finish it off. I use these silicone finishing tools that you get from Bunnings. So go and get a packet of those. I'll have them listed in the description below. Make sure you got plenty of paper towel and then just some soapy water just to go around and finish it all off. But what you generally do, I've got our own finishing fluid. I just give it a quick spray. I spray the tool, run it down, and then after every pass, you want to wipe it off on some paper towel. Keeps it all nice and tidy and make sure you don't make a huge, great big mess. Just peel a few sheets of paper off so they're ready to go. Give it a spray with your soapy water, and then don't use a real small radius, use a larger radius so that you've got more silicone as a body down around the outside. I would definitely use probably the second smallest radius. In most instances, if I've got a big gap, I'll go up to a larger radius just to make sure I bridge the gap in between. In this case, we've got plenty of sealant down underneath and we've jiggled it all around. It's all, you know, nicely spread out, so I'm pretty happy with that. And I think we should be pretty good. So as you can see, that makes light work of it. I'll run down each of the 4 sides now, and then you can actually just finish it off with your finger if you want as well. Just make sure you clean your fingers, give them a spray with isopropyl before you do it. Last thing you want is bacteria getting into your brand new silicone. So finishing off these sides actually went quite well. I've actually now put the clear vent cover back into place and quickly put the pins back in just so it's securely mounted back into place. Now what we'll do is actually the reverse of how we actually took it apart, which is putting this bar back in, putting the pins back through so it's secured onto the clear vent cover itself, and then we'll start assembling the inside. So here's our support bar. I'll just get it into the slots, up like so, and then it's just a case of putting these small pins back in. You simply push them through, locate the hole, and that side is already in. I'll do the same with this side, and voila, we're all back together from the top side. Now it's just a simple case of putting the bottom all back together, and it's pretty much done. How easy was that? So now I'll just pick you up, pop you back inside, and we'll finish the assembly on the underside of the ceiling. And you should be all secured onto the other tripod. And I'm gonna leave this vent open because it is actually quite humid in here. So anyway, the next step is actually putting this surround back on. So you just wanna slide it back into place, and I do it with the sticker side first, so it doesn't get all caught up. You just pop it back into place, put that sticker back on, and then we just start putting the screws back into place. I usually like to start one at each end, that way it holds it up so it doesn't fall down just like that. So that's all done. The last thing is to actually clip this bottom cover on. Now the fly screen actually goes to the hinge side, and then the covering actually goes on the side with the push button so you can actually lock it all down. Pretty sure that's how it goes. That provides clear access to everything up in here. So I'll just push this up into place. It's just a simple case of locating it. And just like that, we're all back together. So hopefully, fingers crossed, when this video is released, we're up relaxing and enjoying ourselves up at Hat Head. And given it is predicted to rain, we've got a nice dry inside of the van with no leaks in through the roof hatch this time. Now, I don't know if anyone has noticed, but this side has a slightly different texture on it. All I did was I just scraped back all the white finish that was all flaking off. I gave it a quick sand. I actually put some spack filler through, and I actually used that spack filler to feather through where the ceiling finish had actually delaminated and was still stuck on. So you can sand it back to a point, but there's, you know, like 1/2 mil thickness of this actual white finish that if you actually paint it over the top, it would be quite visible. So I used a spack filler just to smooth all that out the best I could. And then I just simply rolled some aqua enamel back over the top using a microfiber roller, one of those really small ones. Now for those wondering, the color is actually white polar quarter. So I think it's actually polar white quarter, which is a Dulux color, and it is very, very similar to the Jayco finish of the ceilings inside. So it blends in quite well. It's not the best, but considering what was in here before, this looks 1,000 times better. And best of all, I know this is all sealed back into place. I just hope I didn't upset it too much by pulling everything apart for this video and putting it all back together. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, share it around for anyone that might have an issue just like this. Or even if they have a caravan with the same roof vent and they want to, you know, pull it apart so they can actually clean it properly, that's where this video is really good as well. And of course, put a few comments down below because that helps us out immensely with YouTube. But I hope it helps everyone out there. And I'm going to wind it up right here. So as I always say, thanks for watching. Get out there, stay safe, have fun, and we'll catch you next time.